those weird episodes that works from the perspective of either a casual viewer or a non-casual viewer. What's funny is the previous episode I mentioned was a bit of a breather from the severity of the previous 3 episodes. I say that's funny because apparently, according to JMS, this was supposed to be the breather episode. If I'm not mistaken, the next episode's kind of a breather episode as well. It's the Avalon episode. I don't know, maybe we'll get to some serious stuff after that. 3 episodes of breather? I mean, surely that's enough, right? Ivanova's dream is obvious humor and fluff, and at the same time it does something Babylon 5 tends to do very well, and that's that it uses something for multiple purposes. In this case, the idea that this is part of Ivanova's character being put on display. I think Sheridan pretty much had the right of it, saying, your career military. You're someone who really cares about doing, about taking action, and those actions defining you. And ever since they broke away, Ivanova hasn't done anything. She's just been functioning, existing. Day-to-day operations, right? Can't really do day-to-day. Not really. It's one of the reasons why I like the fact that she takes over the railroad at the end. My only wish is that she was able to go, or I shouldn't say she was able. I wish she went to Veer and was like, hey, by the way, I'm continuing the railroad. That would be good, because this is a very cynical episode without that little addendum at the end. Maybe I'm a bit down anyways, because Twitch just told me to go screw myself. But this episode, in my opinion, was actually very cynical in its overall presentation, and accurately so. In other words, Veer was always an idealist. He finally had the chance to do something. He did it, and then he was pretty much immediately shut down, as it was found out. I mean, think about that for a moment. Now, the irony is if he had decided to not bring this up with Londo, or, I'm saying this wrong, if he had brought this up and been honest with Ivanova and with Sheridan, or just Ivanova for God's sakes, it's entirely more possible that this might not have gone to hell and back. And of course, the fact that the railroad is continuing is nice, but now, I also like one other thing about the dream situation. See, dreams, I've always said, are the business of the mind. Conscious or subconscious. There's something there that your mind is still processing or thinking about, right? And it's not, literal. Duh. I don't believe in dream prophecies or what have you. But I do think dreams have some significance, mostly because they're what you're thinking about. What could be more embarrassing for a career military person than not be on top of things? To screw up. To screw up so obviously and blatantly that it had to be pointed out for you. Hey, you made a mistake. Think about that for a minute. Now, of course, in the dream it's presented in a silly, fluffy way because comedy episode. And that reminds me, I mentioned that I wish Veer had actually been honest with Ivanova about the railroad. Thing is, I have this weird feeling he would have been if he wasn't so flabbergasted about being with this woman. I have a term for what he was experiencing with Lindesty, or I wrote her name down. Lindesty, I got it right. And that's puppy love. Oh, it's so wonderful. There's nothing real in puppy love. It may grow to be something real, but it's basically just, I like you, you like me. And it never lasts forever. I mean, duh, right? And it may or may not evolve or grow or become better or become worse. It kind of depends. But either way, I mention this because I think Veer was so head over heels that he literally forgot himself and kind of didn't talk about the things he probably should have. I could be wrong about that. I could be very wrong about that. I could be trying to give him more credence. So, before I get into the Veer stuff and the Narn stuff, I've got a separate section for that. I want to talk about, like I said, it's kind of a break episode despite being immensely cynical. Like Londo trying to go after the frickin' bug. You noticed the subtlety there, right? And by subtlety I mean incredibly apparentness. That the great and powerful Londo, who is, as I mentioned in the previous episode, among the most powerful Centauri in the galaxy, and the whole of the Centauri Republic. And he's being brought low by a bug. The obvious parallel is so obvious I don't even feel the need to analyze it. But I do like it. It did make me laugh, absolutely. I do sympathize with Londo. I have been told in real life that one of the only times I actually get scary is when there's a spider nearby, because I go into kill it instantly mode. And I will. It will not survive. And then I'll recover, and we're okay. But in that moment, that thing's frickin' dead. So I kind of sympathize. And he used a sword. Maybe I should have thought about that. I do have a sword. I could pull it out and start keeping it ready, you know, just in case. Maybe, I don't know. I like the sight of Sheridan's kitchen just before we cut to the meal. Oh my god, excuse me, yawn attack. Just before we cut to the meal that that Sheridan and Delenn are having. And I like the fact that it shows so clearly that he has absolutely no cooking experience whatsoever, unlike, say, Garibaldi, as he points out in the episode, who is a very good cook. The thing I like more, though, is that Delenn lies to him. She does. She deceives him by making him think the meal is good. The thing is, I don't think that's a lie from any... I don't think that's a deception from any ill intent. It just kind of fits the Minbari perspective. Lying to save someone else's honor is something that's allowed, remember. And she obviously values the effort he put in to making a Minbari dish to share with her. And of course, even after adding more seasoning, it still didn't taste good. I kind of wonder what it actually was, like tofu maybe? I don't know. But, so you could kind of sympathize with her. But I do kind of like the fact that the gesture that he made in making this Minbari dish was not lost on her. That she obviously values him enough to lie, to help him save face and honor, and that he apparently liked the way it tasted, because he ate it without issue. Just some food for thought there. Let's talk about chemistry. I kind of wanted to talk about this somewhere else, but I've literally done both Voyager and Babylon 5 episodes today in my real life, and this has kind of become apparent to me, because the difference between the shows is amazing. Babylon 5 has amazing writing. Voyager has amazing chemistry in its actors. And then everything else that goes into making a show kind of varies between the two. But I think that's something we can pretty definitively put as a stamp on both shows. Babylon 5 doesn't really have that great of chemistry in most of its scenes, even in characters who are written well and have lines that work well against each other. Sheridan and Delenn, for example, I've been tossing this one around in my head for a while now. They just don't have that great of chemistry. There's nothing really sparking between the two. There's nothing gelling between the two in their interactions, even though their characters on the page match each other almost perfectly in the way that they interact with each other and the way that they end up lining up towards the end. It is telling that most of the scenes that really showcase the relationship between Delenn and Sheridan best tend to happen when one of them is present and the other is not. This will be true. This has already been true, but this will continue to be true in the future. I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that. It's just one of those byproducts of acting in general and anything with live action. And every now and again you're just going to get actors who just don't have chemistry together, and that's just life. That being said, I'm willing to push past it. I'm willing to push past the general awkwardness there because, again, the lines on the page are brilliant. And I do like the banter between Sheridan and Delenn. And I do think that they are showcasing how the two of them do obviously care about each other, regardless of the fact that she's pretty, he's cute. I also like the fact that it makes sense that both of those characters, who are extremely action-oriented and very results-oriented, and both of them push themselves too hard, and both of them do too much, and yada, yada, yada. It's one of the rare cases where two characters who are very alike tend to gel well together, character-wise, of course, even if the actors don't. The joke at the beginning is terrible. I know this is rewinding a bit, but this is in my other thoughts. The joke at the beginning is terrible. The whole, oh my god, a Narn with a key, ha ha ha. The teaser doesn't bother to explain why the Narn are there in Veer's room, and I actually kind of like that. It leaves it in the air. here's the thing. I don't buy it for a second. I mentioned, I think I meant to mention that this episode works either casually or from an in-depth analysis perspective. Because from a casual perspective, you look at this situation and you think, yeah, no, there's no way one of the main characters is this mass-murdering bastard. And several people were known to have actually asked JMS in questions and conventions afterwards saying, oh, come on, are we really supposed to think that they think Veer was killing all these Narn? Give me a frickin' break. That's the casual perspective. I do character analysis for a living. I can tell you right now that Veer could descend into that kind of character. Absolutely. But that would be a long fall down the letter line, as I've, the A to Z mentality I've talked about before. That would be a long climb down for Veer to get to that point. I think it is exceptionally more likely that Veer has been doing exactly what Veer has always been doing, trying to accomplish in a situation in which he has no power to do anything. And he himself says that, I finally had the ability to do something about this situation, so I started getting them off, getting them out. They even mention that more Narn have been showing up in Babylon 5, and indeed that's kind of an ironic byproduct of the situation, because now more Narn are going to be able to help out the Alliance of Light, because they're on Babylon 5. But anyways, JMS, I read one of his quotes, and I've got it in front of me here. He wanted to champion the idea that, of course, it's easy to perceive someone who's a decent person who is accomplishing terrible ends. The idea is that Veer would never be the kind of person who would grab the knife and jab into the Narn. That's just not happening. But Veer being someone who signs off on a couple of pieces of paper, and that's the full amount of his interaction, and those actions leading to the deaths of many Narn, it's a lot more believable. And I agree with him, if not for the fact that, again, I've been paying attention to Veer's character arc. He is an idealistic, wise, intelligent individual, a little bumbling, very much lacking in experience, who's probably been ground down his entire life. And yet, that idealism has never been ground out of him. He has flat out said that one of the reasons he stayed on Babylon 5 back before his assignment was for Londo's sake, to try and keep Londo from becoming a darker person. Oh! How interesting that in this episode, where Londo has been without Veer for some time, is where Londo is the most villainous. I'm serious. We have seen many sides to Londo ever since he first got introduced in this show. He is a very multifaceted character, and that's one of the things I like most about him. That and Peter Jurassic is a fantastic actor who really nails the role. But my point is, we now have seen Londo openly praise the mass murder of thousands of Narn because, they're Narns, and then getting upset because of the political ramifications of saving their lives. Now that's not full-tilt, evil, cackling villainy, not like Clark, and not like certain other characters that we haven't even really met yet. But this is the most villain Londo will ever be, right here in this episode. And I find it interesting, because I've asked myself many times, and I'm curious what you guys think of this. I don't think it's spoiling much to say that Londo will be kind of on a recovery curve to be a better person than he is now. Whether that's redemption or not, that's up to you. But he will definitely be trying to be a better person pretty much from this point forward. Do you think he would have ever even managed that if not for the fact that Veer was reintroduced into his life? Because in many ways, Veer did actually function as his conscience. Someone who was able to be there and not judge him and not think he was horrible, and to allow Londo to show up the face to, so that Londo then had to acknowledge what he was denying and had to think about it, triggering Londo's own conscience. I also, I mentioned here, his line about a true Centauri. That is absolutely true. His comments about her, she is definitely a true Centauri. Let's talk about Lindesty. Lindesty, too much effort is put in the episode to try and pull the twist. And that's one of the other reasons why I didn't buy into the fact that Veer was actually the villain of this episode, because I've analyzed fiction for a living. So I look at this and I say the episode is putting far too much effort into making Lindesty feel like this idealistic, bright-hearted, and Veer is being a lot more reserved and otherwise not quite himself than he usually is. And obviously the only reason to do that from a literary perspective is to try and pull a twist on the audience, especially if all that development has kind of been happening off camera, as it has in this case with regards to Veer. So, yeah, no, it was pretty obvious from the beginning that she was the problem and nowhere near as good of a person as she appeared to be. However, in the episode's defense, I will say that JMS does do some good, or excuse me, not JMS. I started assuming JMS wrote these episodes, because after a certain point he writes every episode. Whoever wrote this episode, I don't remember who off the top of my head, did put some good lines in her dialogue before the reveal, before she revealed that she's kind of a murdering, terrible person. The way she talks, the word choices she uses, it's pretty clear she is a very typical Centauri. Centauri lives matter, and I will toe the line, and I'll be obedient to the ideal and to the paperwork, to the politics, to the purple. But I myself am probably horrible and certainly don't give a damn about anyone else's lives unless they happen to do with whatever I'm dealing with. There's a scene in this episode where she is... I'm sorry, let me actually rewind a bit. There are many scenes in this episode where she is trying so hard to be the ideal Centauri wife. And it's very apparent that that's what she's doing, in character. I feel like pointing out this isn't like some inconsistency thing. And she's doing this, and that might have worked if, as a deception to the audience, if this had happened 2 seasons ago. But we've seen Centauri and how they operate and how their politics works and how their arranged marriages work. We know what is expected of an arranged wife. We know that she is just playing into that role. Everything that she's been saying and doing does not indicate any interest in Veer or any indication of her character. We only really get 2 examples of her character in this episode. One at the very end, with her last farewell to Veer, and one right before that, where she offers a gift of this Narn to be murdered to her husband. And she does so as if that's a good frickin' thing. Like the same way that you might walk up to someone you love and say, "Here, I got you some chocolates, honey." She says, "Here, I subjugated this Narn so you can murder him with his own knife." It's the exact same tone. If you change the words around, and the actress did a good job with this, by the way. Did it a little too thick, if I'm being honest. Her performance was very overt. But nevertheless, she did get across the idea of... I could just picture the director saying, imagine you're giving him a box of chocolates, or a nice gift card, or a fluffy teddy bear. Now, picture that tone you would say that with, and then say, I'm giving you this guy to frickin' murder. And she does that very well. I also have to say that her bias, it's incredible. She is incredibly biased, of course, against the Narn. But what really is terrifying and brilliantly written, there's some ominous music in the background that just kind of slowly builds as she talks about how she used to be with her father on Narn, and how they used to cull the herd, kill Narn who were too aggressive. And of course, Father was way too kind. He would actually gas them to sleep rather than say whatever it is she had in mind. Again, knife and helpless tied up body. I mean, think about it for a minute. What I find most interesting is they never actually show how Veer talked his way out of that situation. She never learned his secret. She just learned that he values other sentient and sapient life. Although I guess that is kind of a secret for certain Centauri. And she considers it odd, but, whatever. I'm willing to go with it. And maybe you'll change your mind, or maybe I'll change my mind, whatever. And of course, Veer is still in puppy love because he's insane. No, I'm kidding. I know exactly what it was like to be that young and that stupid with regards to romantic entanglements. I remember some of my younger romantic entanglements when I was, in my teenager years, with about as much embarrassment as he probably will when he looks back on this incident. I think the final thing I want to comment on in this episode, forgive me, is that most of what we're seeing is the expected. Londo being a villain, the analysis of characters in a way that we already knew. I mean, this is just Veer being Veer. This is just Ivanova being Ivanova. Londo's the only one who's actually noticeably different in this episode, the villainy thing I mentioned earlier. What I really want to know is why Babylon 5 has already tackled the topic of there's always more of them than there are of us. Ivanova herself said that with regards to the Clark administration. And we are seeing that same conflict paralleled in the Centauri. Now, by natural consequence, that is shrunk down. We have many different characters amongst the humans of the cast in order to showcase that effort. Amongst the Centauri, we have two, Londo and Veer. So we can only actually show that in two ways. No, iTunes, you do not get to update. But I do like how they're still trying to showcase that. They're still trying to present the same overall idea. I don't know if this is done on purpose or not, but I suspect it was. Because the overall conflict of the Centauri and their social upheaval, if you will, versus the overall conflict of the Clark administration versus the heroes are both very thematically tied into each other. It basically boils down to idealism versus cynicism. Not pragmatism, not realism, but idealist versus cynicist. The cynic says very clearly and demonstrably that their lives don't matter. Saving lives isn't worth putting your own power or your own prestige or the people who put you there at risk. That makes waves. That doesn't lead to good things. Don't do that. The idealist says, and I'm going to more or less quote Veer word for word here, I had to do something. There were people. I had the power to help them. I did something to help them. I wonder if this episode was intended to come down on the cynical side so hard, because the only reason there's any ray of light in this episode at all is because Ivanova independently decides to try and move towards the idealism side of that scale, to continue the railroad, like I mentioned earlier. I really wish Veer found out about that, regardless. That's all I got for today's episode. Oh, one really tiny thing at the end. I've always liked the airport feel of the docking scenes. I feel that's a thing we don't have enough of in sci-fi. I know that sounds weird, but it adds a degree of mundane believability to the thing. Just the feel that it's basically an airport. And I like that. I don't know. That's just something I wanted to mention. Anyways, I will see you guys next time.